Faber, transformational. Welcome to the Crocodile School podcast with Hylke Faber, transformational coach and founder of Growth Leaders Network, an award-winning author of Taming Your Crocodiles, and Carson Heady, best-selling author of Salesman on Fire and sales director at Microsoft, as they explore together how we stay connected to and lead from our best selves. Where do we find the wherewithal to choose again and respond from our best selves, instead of giving into fear-based reactivity, especially when challenged? How do we tame our crocodiles, those fear-driven voices that want to protect our ego at all cost? How do we become what we would like the world to become? Allow yourself to become present and enjoy this episode of the Crocodile School podcast.
Hello all. I'm Carson Heady, joined by my illustrious friend Hylke Faber today. Welcome to the 5th episode of the Crocodile School podcast. Today we're going to be working with our most common fears, the fear families. And it's based on chapter 4 from this wonderful text, Taming Your Crocodiles by Hylke Faber. Chapter 4, learning from our 7 fear families. I always like to go to the text to kind of kick us off and then really dive into the impetus for Hylke gravitating toward a few of these things. And so one of the things that really stood out to me, my highlighted passage, if you will, was it kind of begins with the dictionary defines fear as an unpleasant emotion that's caused by the belief that someone or something is dangerous, likely to cause pain or a threat. How many times have we been there? But then Hylke goes on to talk about how the fact of the matter is that, like breathing, fear is a part of our lives. As long as we're in our human bodies, we're going to experience fear. Fear is natural, yet fear also engenders a sense of stuckness. And I think that's where it all begins for me, is that acknowledgement. This is the important part of my growth journey, is that the acknowledgement that fear is always going to be there. So how do we grapple with it? How do we acknowledge it? How do we use it as fuel? So Hylke, welcome. Great to see you again, my friend. And why don't you talk to us just right out of the gate? Why is talking about fear so important in leadership development?
Thanks, Carson. Delightful to be with you again and to be in the Crocodile School. We called it the Crocodile School for a reason, because it's the school of learning to tame our crocodiles, and our crocodiles is our little name for our fear-based reactivity showing up in energy, thinking, and feeling. And so why is this so important in leadership? So starting with myself, and I invite you to start with yourself. Think about anything challenging or anything that new that you are about to embark on, a difficult conversation or a new job or a difficult goal or whatever it might be. And chances are there's this sort of duopoly of voices in the head. On the one hand, there's this, I feel a sense of inspiration, maybe. If we're lucky, we still have a touch into that. And at the same time, there's probably also this contraction. Likely there's this contraction of, I'm not sure what's going to happen, and I have to do something to protect myself from what's going to happen, the imagined future that I don't want to be happening or be part of. So this is very natural. And when we are not aware of it, that this is natural and this is happening, then what happens? We may get so overwhelmed by this fear-based reactivity with that may lead into thinking like I shouldn't do it, or maybe I shouldn't say it, or I should try to get through this as quickly as possible by being brutal, or I'm getting totally in my head. I'm cutting myself off in a way by giving into this from my true potential, from what I'm truly capable of. So when I'm not conscious of it, I, by definition, will play small when I give into fear-based thinking. So it shrinks me. And the good news is, as human beings, is that we can be aware of that and say, I am experiencing contraction. I'm experiencing something that keeps me small, something inside of myself. You can almost feel it, like a tension in your body, or thinking that goes very rapid, or heat, or something. And just knowing that, becoming aware of it, the awareness gives us the choice to actually choose again and to say, I'm feeling this fear, which will likely lead me to a not at my best behavior. How can I choose again? Who do I choose to be? What would it be like if I chose to show up in this moment as my best? And for most people, that is something to do with showing up from my values, from the things that I truly value, the things that are truly important to me, like love or truthfulness or courage or gentleness, whatever it might be. So that's one reason that I think talking about fear in leadership is important.
One of our colleagues and friends, Mr. Rick Gage, he has a really interesting way of taking the title of your book, Taming Your Crocodiles, right? So you just define the crocodiles perfectly. I was very intrigued by his definition of the word taming in this case, and it's really decharging, really decharging the emphasis and the power that these crocodiles or fears have over us in these moments, right? Because anytime that we have a fear, to your point, Hylke, you have that tightness. You have oftentimes that knee-jerk fight or flight mechanism. And those are the types of things that cause us to react and respond often in ways that are uncomfortable. It's that we feel uncomfortable with the fear so that we act out of that discomfort. And so that's what I like so much about what you've articulated here is, how do we identify, okay, why am I having this sense of fear? And how can I address it head on in a better and more constructive way? And I think that goes right into the fear families, right? So I would love to have you walk us through the fear families. How did you develop them? Why are they called fear families? Tell us more.
Yeah. So taking a step back, first of all, uncharging fear so that we don't have to act it out. That is a beautiful definition. I love that you brought that up, Carson, and compliments to Rick Gage for bringing that forth, of how we work with our limitations, you could say. So we've had this conversation about fear with many people, with Growth Leaders Network, with many clients, many teams, cultures. We're sometimes in a room with like 100 or 1,000 people, and we talk about fear. And we do this exercise in large groups, which is about discover your core fear. Like, figure out, what are you really afraid of? And we do this exercise, so list your fears, and then people talk about what their fears are, and then we talk about what happens if one of those fears you're really afraid of, what happens if that happens? And what happens if that happens? Let's say I'm afraid of being abandoned. What am I afraid of then? Well, then I might be afraid of being a failure, etc. So there's like a sort of a few roots that we discover underneath each of these fears. So I become curious. It's like, okay, maybe there are some patterns in our fears, just like there are patterns in human beings, in values. And what I found is that there are categories of fears that you can kind of look around and say, there are actually different groupings of fears. And the good news is, if I group it, like if I can see it, then I can actually do something with it, right? If I don't recognize it, I can't do anything about it. But when I recognize it, that becomes conscious in my mind, and I can choose again. So the impetus of categorizing fears was to recognize that, not to have the perfect map or anything like that, but just have a sense of, that's where I'm going. That's the reason. So with that awareness, I'd like to share what those categories are. And we call them the 7 fear families. They're not the perfect fear families. They're not the perfect categories, but they give a sense. And they're loosely related to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So it starts with fear family number 1, which is about survival. right? Okay, let's say I go into a difficult meeting. I'm not going to say what I really want because I'm afraid I might lose my job. Fear family number one. And I act that out by probably holding back or saying what my boss needs to hear or whatever it is, actually thereby creating a situation where I'm not at my best, which might actually paradoxically lead to me being fired. That's a funny thing about those fears, right? Once I give in to them, I often co-create situations where they become my lived reality. Now, that's fear family number one. Fear family number two is saying, okay, well, let's say, but Maslow, I have sort of thought about I've got my survival under control. The next thing I'm going to care about is relationships. So my next fear might be about losing the relationship. So the next one is often the fear of abandonment. So I'm not going to say anything because my colleague is going to think I'm crazy. Right? And then the third one is like, well, I'm growing up a little bit, says Maslow, and I become interested in self-esteem and being somebody. Like I want to be seen as competent or good or nice or whatever it is. And here the fear of failure and of losing control gets born, right? So I'm not going to say something where I don't know the outcome in the meeting, for example, right? In that way, a meeting becomes very stale. Like it becomes very programmed, you could say. It loses its freshness. Then we get to fear family number four, which is the fear of uncertainty. I'm going to like really not want to get into uncertain water. I have no interest in discovery. So I'm not asking any questions in the meeting, for example. Then we get to fear number five, which is the fear of, well, expressing myself. Maslow says, you kind of have a sense of self-esteem. Number three, you want to self-actualize. And then as you do this, you are becoming more visible to the world, like we're doing in this podcast, or when you're in a meeting and you're saying something radical. You're like, well, maybe I'm not going to say this because people are not going to like it. They're going to get hurt. So there's a fear of hurt and being hurt by others. So I'm going to hold back. Yeah. Then number six is, as I'm engaging more in the world, but the natural thing that starts, that we start to have an interest in seeing the connection between it all. Like I say something in this meeting, but that meeting is happening at the same time. And hey, at the moment, like we're laying off people, at the same time we want to increase sales. How does this all fit together? And I get confused. So now I develop a fear of complexity, which could like stifle me. It's like this is too complex, so I'm not going to say anything. And then fear number seven is the fear of losing my identity, because in all of this, I might get so caught up in like being the perfect person, and I finally got it. Like I tamed on my fear. I'm fearless. Look at me. But that's the problem, because now I'm going to be like this person that tries to be in the center of attention, for example, in the meeting. I try to be special. So we call it the fear of losing identity. So in a nutshell, these are 7 fears. Chapter talks about it in a lot more detail. And then why are they called families? Well, 2 reasons. One is these fears often have a whole group of related behaviors associated with them, like a family. Like the fear of abandonment might lead to not speaking up or judging others who are different or whatever it might be. And the other reason we call them families is because they are familiar to us and they're often passed on from what we grew up with. So that's also why we call them fear families. All right. I know that's a lot of talking. I'm going to ask you, Carson, which of those fears, of those 7, is most present for you as a sales leader?
So Hylke, we're in this lovely place of transparency and vulnerability, and I always feel like I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I'm going to say that I believe that a lot of leaders right now and in general face all of these on a very regular basis, as do I, and I'd be hard pressed to point out just one, quite frankly, because it can be a rolling scale. And I know the next segment, we're going to talk a little bit more about a specific area. I'm going to be coached. That's the fun segment, fun part of the program. But my question to you would really be along the lines of, is it normal? Help us feel normal for experiencing all of these relatively regularly, I will say that I think a lot of people, I'm very aware that these fears are here, but I very swiftly work to push them down and push forward. And that can be an exhausting practice.
Yes.
It can lead to burnout because I'm not leveraging these necessarily as I should be. I can use them as fuel, and I can use them as motivation to press on. I can use it as the chip on my shoulder to overachieve and seek approval and make sure that I'm, pleasing everyone. But those types of things are, can very quickly turn into a perpetual cycle that leads to burnout. So I guess my question before the break, a really important one, how do we not only work with fear effectively, but also get to a point where we can be, in fact, grateful for it?
So the first thing to notice for me is that we can feel fear. It's kind of a wake-up call. It's like, I'm feeling something. Imagine if you couldn't feel anything. That would be maybe not such a great life, right? So we have the capacity to feel. You say, I can feel fear. I can feel fear. Okay. Now, the mind quickly makes this into something that it's not. Like something I have to get rid of, suppress, because it doesn't feel comfortable, right? That's one way to look at it. Another way to look at it is as an invitation, as a door. It's like, what is this fear trying to teach me? And we're not talking about survival fears that have to do with don't jump in for the car or don't jump into the fire, those kinds of things, right? That's different. We're talking about emotional, ego-driven fears. So when I'm afraid of, let's say, afraid of abandonment in a meeting where I don't want to speak up, I can feel into the fear, and I can become curious about what lies beyond the fear. Who would I be without this fear? And what becomes possible for me without this fear? And what might it be that I truly care about that this fear is actually relating to in some ways? So when I'm afraid of being abandoned, there's something about the care about relationships in there, right? So without the fear of abandonment, I might feel more free to say what's on my mind. But remembering the fear of abandonment, I may not do it callously, but I may do it compassionately. And I might discover something about compassion and uniting. It's like, there's something about the fabric of relatedness that I'm afraid of, and therefore I might not have completely mastered it yet. So there's something for me to learn. So that gives me a sense of humility. It's like, how do I relate to this person with empathy? Especially that person that disagrees. So in this way, you could say each of those fears holds an invitation for us to grow. And it says, what are you here to learn now?
I think the real beauty in that, Hylke, is that what you've articulated there really gives us the ability to acknowledge we're all works in progress, and that at any stage in the game we can take on new perspectives and ways of addressing each of these fears. Thank you for that. So we're going to take a quick break, and then we'll be back with the coaching segment of the program.
You are listening to the Crocodile School podcast, where we are exploring connecting deeply to our true selves, especially when challenged. If you would like to learn more about leadership and team connectedness and taming the crocodiles that get in the way of leading from our true selves, please contact Growth Leaders Network on LinkedIn. And now back to the Crocodile School podcast with your hosts, Hylke Faber and Carson B. Heady.
So this is my favorite part. somewhat selfishly because I get to get the pearls of wisdom from Hylke as I am coached, but I try to speak for leaders everywhere. As I feel like a lot of the things that I grapple with are things that other leaders grapple with as well. And I didn't want to give a ton of spoilers before we jumped on, but really, and Hylke, this will bleed right into answering directly the question that you asked me before. Which of the fear families speak most to me? And I'm not. I'm not lying when I say each one of them has a very distinct place around one core component. And for me, it's around change. And it's around the fear of many elements of change in sometimes my personal, sometimes my professional life. I will cling to certain elements so tightly that I'll go through each and every one of these. And what I mean by that is, obviously the unwillingness or desire to do or say something that I think might jeopardize a relationship, even if that relationship isn't on strong footing, or the uncertainty of making a significant change in one of those elements, whether it's pertinent to my career, whether it's pertinent to just life in general, doing things drastically different. And it's hard because I think a lot of us as leaders, we look back. It's really easy to connect the dots backwards, and you understand how you got to the place that you were, and you're very grateful. I have a very grounded sense of gratitude for everything that I have and everything that I've done, and the wins and the losses, the successes and the failures. But once you get to a certain point and you've had a fair amount of losses and setbacks, sometimes you don't want to go through more. And so I think sometimes that will lead me to cling very tightly to some of the things that I have or the current state, as opposed to risking any of that, even if that risk could lead to a better path.
Yeah. So in that, Carson, I appreciate your vulnerability. There's a fear of what will happen, the fear of the future. Like, I've accumulated this goodness, let's say, over years with hard work. I've really worked at it, and it's here. And I also know what it feels to be in setback land. Don't like to go back there. And now I have a fear of moving forward through change because I have a fear of what might happen, right? So let's take a look and stare the fear in the face, right? So just take one area of your life that you care about, that you can share about today, where you have a fear of what might happen. And tell me what might happen from the crocodile's perspective.
Yeah, I mean, even looking at these families, right? There's a lot of thought around, just some of the different areas. I love that you called this around families because, obviously it starts there. I think there's a lot of elements that family can instill in you, and the people that you, associate with, friends, people you work with, people you work for. And so there's that element of reputation. Am I doing what's expected of me? So if I make a drastic change in, what I do or how I conduct myself, or I take on a new project, or, whatever that looks like, am I being true to the reputation or what I want, people to perceive of me? That could be one key element. And I think the other would be, as you become comfortable, you can also become complacent. And so that inability or maybe lack of desire to, put yourself out there, take a new step, personally or professionally, I think often these are the things that keep me a lot of times in that bubble or in that box. And so, and I've encountered a lot of these over the years, right? I mean, over my career, I've thought about taking, career steps that I shied away from. And, personally, I've made changes with relationships that I have, close relationships. But I've stayed in, relationships that were not fulfilling me, friends that I had for years where I ignored all of the signs and I just stayed the way things were. And I was afraid to say anything because I thought I was risking something. But the reality was I wasn't. So these are the types of things that I grapple with most, is that, that inclination to stay in a situation whether it's fueling me or not,
Yes.
and that lack of ability or desire to force a change because I fear the unknown.
And you fear the unknown. And you gave I think one of the insights already very much in the beginning of what you're saying, because you're trying to protect some kind of image of who you think you should be, to your friends, to your colleagues, to yourself. And so what is that image, Carson, that you're trying to protect so hard? It's like, I'm working so hard to make sure people see me as fill in the blanks. And as I'm asking you this question, I'm asking everyone this, including myself. And for me, just to go first, give a little bit of space to think about this, is, I have to be seen as the sage, wise, and peaceful one. You know what it results into? With my husband, when I don't feel well, he'll ask me, so how are you, Hylke? And I say, oh, great. And his response is like, huh.
I think all marriages are like that. Yeah. That resonates with me so much, because it's when you ask that question, I have to be the best son. I have to be the best husband, the best dad, the best employee, the best team leader, all of those things wrapped into one. And it is, on any given day, I might be able to nail 2 of the 5 or 6, right? But you feel like an absolute failure where you fall behind in any of those areas. It's a no-win scenario.
Yes. And so there's an image that's always on your shoulder that you're comparing life to and saying up, down, up, down. Oh, and mostly down, because the image gets better and better. And so life does its things, and then you lose again, and you you pick yourself up by the bootstraps. So what's the cost of holding on to that fear-based self-image to you, Carson?
Continuing to feel like a failure.
Feeling like a failure. And what does that do for your general sense of well-being, creativity, all this stuff?
It's debilitating.
It's debilitating. It sucks the life out of us, right? It's like you can see these, sorry for the graphic image here, you can see these images that are ego-based images that we learned somewhere early in life, that we have to be a good son and a good this and a good da. And we sort of, that becomes our commandment our contract from which we live. And now we become scared deep down into our bones to violate the contract, right? To step out of that self-image. And so what do we discover? Carson, what do you discover? And this is not maybe a bam, done, but as you allow yourself to open that door, it's like, what lies behind that self-image? Who would you be if you no longer needed to give so much energy to that self-image? Dare I say, be free from it?
Yeah, I feel a lot more free. And I think it's amazing too, even describing it. There's that immediate tenseness when you're thinking about it. But as you describe it and lay bare, I almost realize how ridiculous it sounds as I say it. All of these different areas where I'm trying to be perfect. It's impossible. And yet I realize what I can control in each of these. I can control how I show up in each of these scenarios. I can control how I, shift and maneuver in the relationships that matter, and relationships that aren't adding anything. Perhaps they need to be reevaluated, or situations that aren't adding anything, perhaps they need to be reevaluated.
Yes. It's like, I care about you so much that I don't care how you see me or how I see myself. That's not relevant, right? And I care about doing the right thing purposefully, seeing what's needed in this moment, being in reality so much that I forget to care about what I look like, how I show up. And, we see this like in glimpses in regular life when you like a parent jumps in front of traffic to get the child out of the way, right? It's not thinking, I'm going to be a good parent now. I'm going to be compassionate to the driver. No, this is what I'm doing. And that freshness is what we're talking about. That's what lies beyond, you could say, this fear-based construct that we are taught to live behind.
I think very important that we, are honest with ourselves at the very least. What are the fears? Why, why we feel that we, where are they based, right? Being able to acknowledge where they're based, and then how we might be able to approach them differently. Because I can tell you, even during the course of this session, walking through some of these things, I feel great being able to acknowledge it and work through them, and then also think about how ridiculous of a proposal it is for me to be perfect at everything.
Yes. Imagine the world if many of us start to realize that we don't have to be perfect, and we don't have to be fearing imperfection or failing or even fearing abandonment or fearing not having enough. Like there's a sense of creativity and just almost like a naked willingness to being here in the meeting. And that's how innovation happens. That's how true care happens, and how conversations become really real. Fearless leadership.
Yeah, I had a conversation recently with someone on my team, and they actually said how refreshing it was that I had, gone through the investment of time to make sure to point out how I wasn't invincible. And it was the opposite of the way that I was brought up in leadership. I always thought I had to be bulletproof and invincible, and that, folks had to think that I could do literally anything. But I've actually gotten the feedback over time as I've evolved as a leader that it makes me a lot more approachable, a lot more relatable, and somebody that they want to work for even more when I can show that I'm a human just like them. So these sessions just keep getting better and better. Hylke, I appreciate the time today. Obviously today we talked about the prevalence of fear in our lives. It's not going away, but that, if we can work to identify where these fit in the fear families, why we're feeling these, and we can look at them in a different way, in a different light, and live with them from a different place, that it can make all the difference in the world. Next time, we're going to go into chapter 5 from Taming Your Crocodiles, which is Truth Inquiry into Our Crocodilian Roots. And can't wait to see everyone next time. Hylke, anything else before we close today?
Just the saying that fear can be seen as a doorway into greater freedom. It's just like it's showing us a place where our mind gets stuck. And our job can be to gently unstuck it and open the door to whatever lies behind.
Poetic. I love that. So everyone, thanks so much for joining us today. Please join us next time at the Crocodile School podcast. You can also join us for a live Growth Leaders Network community conversation. That's via Zoom. And look for these community conversations. They will be available, more information on LinkedIn. So thank you again for joining Hylke and me today. And until next time, keep taming those crocodiles.
Thank you for joining the Crocodile School podcast with your hosts Hylke Faber and Carson Heady. Take a moment to pause and appreciate something about yourself. And enjoy taming your crocodiles, growing more and more into your true potential. See you next time at the Crocodile School.